After last-minute negotiations, Türkiye, Sweden and Finland reached a deal on allowing the two Scandinavian countries to join NATO ahead of the Madrid summit. How will this impact Europe's overall security? I'll break it all down here on Straight Talk. Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Ayşe Süberkaş. Türkiye got what it wanted. That's how Ankara is describing the outcome of tense negotiations that cleared the way for Sweden and Finland to join NATO. The breakthrough came just hours before a NATO summit was set to kick off in Madrid. For weeks, Ankara strongly opposed Sweden and Finland's bid to join the alliance over their support for terrorist groups that have attacked Türkiye. After last-minute negotiations, the three countries signed a memorandum that addresses Türkiye's concerns. The two Nordic countries have agreed to cooperate fully with Türkiye in its fight against the PKK and other related terrorist groups. Both countries also agreed to lift an arms embargo on Türkiye that was placed back in 2019. Sweden's Prime Minister hailed the agreement, saying their inclusion into NATO will boost the alliance's security. President Erdogan also met his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden on the sidelines of the summit, discussing everything from NATO's enlargement, the conflict in Ukraine, to stability in the Aegean and Syria. NATO's steps to welcome Sweden and Finland comes as the Western alliance confronts Russia over its attack on Ukraine, which was launched back in late February. So, is this a breakthrough for NATO? Will Sweden and Finland really follow through with Turkey's concerns on terrorism? And how will Russia react to this latest development? Let's go now to TRT World's diplomatic correspondent, Andrew Hopkins, who was at the NATO summit in Madrid. Andrew, could you tell us about the major accomplishments from the summit? How significant were they, and what kind of message is being sent to the world now that the conflict in Ukraine is well into its fourth month?
Well, there have been some major changes for NATO during this summit here in Madrid. One of them is their attitude towards Russia, and that's largely because of the conflict that's been happening over the last few months in Ukraine. According to the Secretary General now, Russia is seen as the most significant and direct threat to the organisation. When you think back a few years, they were trying to work with it as a strategic partner, but that is no longer the case. As a result of the conflict in Ukraine, they've now pledged to work with the government there to completely upgrade, overhaul the military in the country. Joe Biden has pledged something like $800 million worth of extra military aid for the country. That's on top of what other countries are giving, such as the United Kingdom, such as France. Also, NATO as an organisation as a whole is now going to put, by the middle of next year, something like 300,000 of its forces on high alert in Eastern Europe. That figure currently stands at about 40,000. We've also seen the start of another expansion of NATO because the application process of Finland and Sweden is now taking place. They've been officially invited to join. And also there's a change in attitude a little towards China, because the NATO Secretary General is saying they don't regard this country as an adversary, but it's certainly presenting them with some challenges. He says that it's bullying some of its neighbours, and they've got to examine this situation and make their policies accordingly.
So how did the summit go for Türkiye? I mean, did it get what it wanted? And how has Türkiye's decision to drop its objections towards Sweden and Finland's membership bids been received there?
Well, I think there were two major areas which were of benefit for the Turkish government, and one of them probably not directly related to the NATO summit itself, but it was the first time that we heard publicly on the record from US President Joe Biden that he was in favour of doing a deal with Turkey to sell them some F-16 fighter jets. And if this deal can be pulled off, it'll probably help resolve what has been a fairly long-standing, complicated dispute over a number of defence issues. You may remember back in 2017, the Turkish government placed an order with Russia to buy an S-400 missile defence system after it couldn't buy a similar system from the United States. As a result of that, the Turkish government was removed by the Donald Trump administration from a project to develop an F-35 fighter jet. Now, Türkiye had paid something like $1.4 billion into that project. It now says it wants that money back, or else we can use it for the F-16 fighter jet program. So it's not cut and dried yet. This move has to go through Congress, but it seems very clear now that Joe Biden wants it to happen. The other thing is this deal with Finland and Sweden, the memorandum all three countries have signed. Türkiye will now give its approval to their membership process as long as it lives up to the pledges it's made in the document, which are mainly about clamping down on terrorist action, the PKK, the YPG, organisations such as that, and lifting an arms embargo on Türkiye itself.
Yes, it seems everyone left the summit pleased. Andrew Hopkins from Madrid, thank you very much indeed. And to break down the recent NATO summit further, joining me now from Istanbul is Tarık Oğuzlu. He is a professor of international relations at Istanbul Aydın University. From Vilnius, Giedrius Chesnakas. He is the director of political science studies at Military Academy of Lithuania. And from Muğla, Türkiye, Matthew Bryza, former U.S. ambassador. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you on the program. Tarık, talk to us about the significance of this latest NATO summit. And will it go down as one of the most consequential one we have seen in years?
It's for sure that the NATO summit that took place in Madrid is quite important. The last time the NATO leaders met together to finalize the strategic concept took place in 2010 in Lisbon. So 10 years have already passed. So many things have changed in the dynamics of global politics. But this time the summit is important for two specific reasons. One concerns the ongoing deterioration in relations between the Western actors on the one hand and Russia and China on the other hand. And the other reason why it is important is that because this speaks volumes about the future projection of Turkish relationship with the Western actors. NATO has already decided that now Russia is the number one existential challenge. There is no question mark on this particular issue. But regarding relations with China, I think NATO has tended to adopt a much milder approach. Rather than depicting China as a kind of threat, they have decided to name it as a kind of challenge. So this is something different from the way how allies look at China and Russia.
Okay, so Giedrius, leaders also agreed to boost the alliance's defenses, including the establishment of a new force model that would put about 300,000 troops on high alert. How would this shape NATO's future, and what other landmark decisions were made at the summit?
I think this will significantly increase capabilities to defend NATO's eastern border and react to full-scale invasions, what we have observed from Russian side on invasion in Ukraine. I would also like to stress the importance of Finland and Sweden prospect joined to NATO, and this will significantly affect security environment in the Baltic Sea region. So this is main achievements of NATO summit.
And after hours of tense negotiations, Finland and Sweden finally agreed to the biggest demands made by Türkiye. I'm just going to go over briefly what Article 4 of the memorandum says. As prospective NATO allies, Finland and Sweden extend their full support to Türkiye against threats to its national security. To that effect, Finland and Sweden will not provide support to YPG, PYD, and the organization described as FETÖ in Türkiye. And Turkey also extends its full support to Finland and Sweden against threats to their national security. So, Matthew, can we call this a significant win for Turkey? Did Ankara get what it wanted?
It got a lot of what it wanted. It got finally listened to. It got its NATO allies to pay attention, and the Secretary General himself, Jens Stoltenberg, saying Turkey's demands with regard to YPG and other terrorist organizations are legitimate and must be addressed. So Turkey got that. Turkey got Sweden and Finland recognizing that they have to stop supporting the PKK and they have to stop supporting YPG, PYD, and FETÖ. Those are positive steps forward. But as we've heard subsequently, the Turkish side, especially President Erdogan, is expecting more. It's expecting extradition of up to 73 PKK suspects.
Yes.
Sweden is saying, okay, we'll go along with that, but according to our legal system. So Turkey got, the main thing is acknowledgement of that its terrorism, counterterrorism demands are legitimate and are part of NATO's own calculus of its own fundamental security interests.
So do you believe there's a need to be constant follow-ups to make sure these countries honor their pledges?
Yeah, 100%. And Turkey will make that clear. You know, the key, I think, is that Ankara not push the negotiating process too long. not make one series of demands after another until it comes to a point where it looks like maybe there's not NATO solidarity in resisting Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Because the other point about this summit, as our other guests were saying, is the new strategic concept is a sea change. The last strategic concept in Lisbon in 2010 did not identify any foe in the world at all, and was premised upon trying to cooperate with Russia. Now, as we've just heard, the NATO strategic concept aims at defending the Baltic states and all of NATO territory against any contemplated Russian attack, which means deterring Russia by being ready to defend NATO territory. That is fundamentally new.
So, Tarek, how significant is the veto's inclusion for the first time in a NATO document? Does it mean those countries will at some point recognize it as a terrorist organization? And do you believe this article especially brings this veto organization under a spotlight for all members to see?
Actually, we should make it very clear that neither Finland nor Sweden recognize NATO and YPG as terrorist organization.
Yes.
They define those actors as kind of sources of threat for Turkey. But it is also quite important that these two prospective members of NATO had made it very clear that they will take all kinds of measures in order to make Turkey feel satisfied with these actors. But it is also important that, as you have just pointed out, other members of NATO now are quite aware of the fact that Turkey is so sensitive and so keen on this issue, because we all know that before this summit meeting took place, the real target of Turkish decision makers was the United States and other members of NATO. So it is good that for the first time in the history of alliance, particularly NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg had made it clear that Turkey's security considerations are legal and legitimate. So other members are also behind such kind of a compromise. So it wouldn't be a kind of far-fetched conclusion to say that now NATO somehow shares Turkey's security interests and concerns.
So, Gredia, Sweden and Finland did not officially recognize the YPG as a terror organization in the three-page memorandum, but said they are committed to preventing the activities of the PKK and their affiliates and their territories. Is it likely to present a potential point of friction in the future between those countries?
The possibility for that exists, and we will see in the future, because still the new members, the future members, possibly Finland and Sweden, will have to be ratified by the parliaments of all NATO member states. So the Turkey still has possibilities to push the buttons on Sweden especially, and as well as Finland. So the friction might be there might be some friction in the future.
So, Matthew, could there be a collective approach by member states towards Turkey's security concerns in the future? We know that there are differences, but Secretary General of NATO Stoltenberg said no ally other than Turkey has suffered more brutal attacks than Turkey, actually. So could this mean a green light for Turkey's prospective military operation into northern Iraq, northern Syria? And do you believe that Sweden, Finland, France, and other European countries might drop their objections to Turkey's military operations?
I think they might, Aisha. I think they might. I mean, there still will be domestic political constituencies, especially in Sweden, where a Kurdish politician is crucial to the coalition holding together. There'll be some complaining in Sweden and Finland, but I think they will drop their objections largely. And of course, they have to lift the arms embargo on Turkey that they imposed when Turkey conducted Operation Peace Spring a couple of years ago against YPG terrorists in northern Syria. So your question is about the collective understanding of Turkey's security interests. I think that's there now. And I also think Turkey can play a gigantic role to the north in making sure that its security concerns are even more deeply appreciated by virtue of helping to unlock grain shipments from Ukraine. And that's a very important role Turkey's maybe about to play.
So, Tarek, how about the US, France, and other several countries' continued support to the YPG would play out after especially this summit? And why hasn't the US, let's say, and other NATO members designated the YPG as a terror organization yet?
That's the crux of the issue. We have to make it very clear that this is the main problem. facing Turkish-American relationship. So in this particular sense, the kind of tension in bilateral relationship will continue to exist from my own perspective. But again, let me repeat once again what I have already mentioned. So this is quite important. NATO, of which Turkey is a part, made it very clear that Turkey's security concerns are legitimate and legal. We have to underline it very clearly. But let me also tell you something different from this particular point. With giving its approval to membership of Finland and Sweden, Turkey has made it very clear that it values membership in the alliance. So if Turkey is a Western country, Turkey is a staunch ally of the NATO. And this also makes it very clear that Turkey's side in the ongoing confrontation between NATO and Russia might come much closer to the NATO side.
Yes.
So from this moment onwards, it's going to be quite difficult for Turkey to adopt a kind of go-between position between these two power blocks.
So
that's also quite important.
Yes, okay. So Giedrius, during the summit, U.S. President Joe Biden has thrown his support behind potential F-16 sale to Turkey. How significant is this, and what do you think has changed? Is this somewhat linked to Turkey's approval of Sweden and Finland's memberships?
I assume that it is definitely linked to Turkey's approval of Swedish and Finnish membership in NATO. Let's not forget that Turkey, for a number of years, already asked for F-16s and even F-35s, but United States had considerations when Turkey bought Russian S-400 defense missile systems that those systems might negatively affect the defense capabilities and capabilities of Air Force of United States and integrated NATO Air Force. So now it seems that the President Biden administration is putting its weight behind the deal, and we'll see how it will transfer in the future.
Matthew, will Joe Biden be able to convince Congress on this time, and does he have enough support? What's the mood there?
Yeah, as we've discussed before, Aisha, he can. President Biden can convince the Congress because the main opponent to the sale is now one of the key senators, a member of President Biden's own party, Senator Robert Menendez of New Jersey, who always is on the side opposing Turkey. And he opposed my nomination as ambassador to Azerbaijan, for example. Mm-hmm. So it's been a question all along of how much political capital does President Joe Biden want to spend to persuade Senator Menendez to go along with and not block the sale. And now Biden has signaled he is willing to spend a lot of political capital. And I think, therefore, Senator Menendez will be persuaded and the F-16 sales and upgrades will happen.
So, Tarek, could decisions taken at the NATO summit be construed as a heavy blow to Russian President Vladimir Putin, who had justified Russia's attack on Ukraine as a warning against NATO's expansion? Did he miscalculate here?
It is for sure that rather than expecting NATO members apart from each other, NATO members have come much closer to each other. So we have very clearly seen that NATO has become revitalized in one way or another. In particular, under American leadership, this also pushed the European allies to increase their military expenditures. But I think from my own perspective, NATO, from this day onward, will become the key security actor in the European continent. And European reliance on NATO, European dependence on the United States, I think will increase in the years to come. This is also another side effect of this summit meeting in NATO, in Madrid. Russian leadership, Putin, should not feel quite happy with the ongoing strengthening of the alliance. So this is just the opposite of what he wanted in the early years of the crisis.
So, Giedrius, how would Finland and Sweden's membership to NATO change the security architecture in the Baltic region? And how do you think the Russian President Vladimir Putin will act moving forward?
Basically, now after Finland and Sweden will join NATO, the Baltic Sea will become basically internal lake of NATO. So it basically destroy Russia's anti-access area denial capabilities because of the Swedish geopolitical positions and the Finnish as well. Russia will have a much longer border with NATO states, which Russia will have to address and put more forces on Finnish border stronger, so Russia will not be able to concentrate its forces on the Pskov region and Kaliningrad, so it will have to disperse those forces. And of course, naval, aircraft and air capabilities significantly increase. Let's not forget that Finland has one of the strongest armies in Europe, despite its small size. So this significantly boosts NATO capabilities to act in the Baltic region.
But Matthew, where would that leave relationship between Russia and Turkey? Are there any challenges that lie ahead between the two capitals?
That depends on President Putin. He has tried for years to split Turkey away from NATO. And that's now failed. Now that Turkey has gone along with Finland and Sweden joining NATO, Turkey is permitting the most important new membership in decades into the alliance. As we just heard, the Baltic Sea has now become an internal NATO lake. And previously, President Putin had responded to goodwill by the U.S., by President Obama's Russia reset policy in 2009, or by the 2010 NATO strategic concept that treated Russia as a partner. He responded with the largest military buildup in peacetime history in Russia in the Baltic region. And he responded to the 2010 strategic concept of NATO treating Russia as a friend by invading Ukraine in 2014. So now I think when he knows there's no funny game to be played in threatening the Baltic states anymore, I think he will become less combative, easier to manage, and he knows Turkey is fully on side with NATO.
But Tarek, Russian media has started talking about the idea that the Russian army should invade Lithuania and capture the Suwalki Gap that is separating Russia from Belarus. Is there a risk of a full-blown conflict in this region? And why Lithuania has blockaded Kaliningrad for the last 2 weeks?
Of course, this is a quite risky action on the side of the Russians. But first of all, we have to make it clear that the Suwalki Gap connects Kaliningrad with the Russian mainland territory. So the kind of transportation that takes place throughout this particular region is quite important for Russian interests. But we should also approach this question from a larger tit for tat kind of game that countries play in international politics. So Russians will make it very clear that they are not satisfied with the results of the Madrid summit meeting of NATO. So they should try to increase the level of tension, because otherwise they have to take whatever NATO members have decided to take for granted. So they have to give a kind of message suggesting that they are not happy with this ongoing situation on the ground. So it's a part of escalation.
We're hearing the European Commission has been pushing Lithuania on behalf of Berlin for 2 weeks to lift this Kaliningrad blockade. So, Giedrius, could this boil over into a conflict in the region?
Well, just to make it clear, this is not a blockade, because Lithuania does not allow to pass via its territory only the sanctioned goods, but all rail connections, car connections can move via Lithuania, except for of the goods that are included in the European Union sanctions. Of course, seeing what happened in Ukraine in 2014, seeing what happened in 2022, we can never be sure what Russia decides. It can decide anything, and all these threats they are taken, they might be implemented. Let's not forget that there are ideas even to recall recognition of Lithuanian independence in State Duma. So we can expect anything from Russia. So the stronger NATO is essential for the security of the Baltic states.
Yes. So apart from all these tensions, Matthew, and the Ukraine crisis, South Korea and Japan have attended this year's summit for the first time. What kind of a message you think the alliance did want to give to the world here?
That's what we heard in the beginning from the professor. This new NATO strategic concept identifies China for the first time as a challenge that needs to be managed. So the allies of the United States, and by extension NATO, to whom the United States has sworn an Article 5-like security pledge, include South Korea and Japan. So it's only logical to integrate them into this discussion of the new NATO strategic concept. And by the way, Australia has a new special military relationship with both the U.S. and the United Kingdom, two of the key NATO members. So to me, this is a sign that NATO's strategic vision is broadening to include China, even as it's focusing, like it never has since the end of the Cold War, on the physical threat posed by Russia.
So, Tarek, is NATO shifting its focus on new partners?
I think this is an open-ended question. I am of the view that NATO is not trying to become a global security alliance, particularly from the American perspective. Maybe you have already noticed that this NATO document underlines the point that only European countries can join NATO. And NATO has already established global partnership with these 4 countries in East Asia. We already know it. But we also know that the United States approach China in Far East Asia from another perspective. Rather than bringing NATO much closer to China's territorial borders, the Americans are trying to bring into existence a kind of anti-Chinese alliance structures in the region, Quad and AUKUS kind of initiative. But it is for sure that the cooperation between NATO on the one hand, and these American-led security initiatives on the other hand, will intensify in the years to come. It is for sure.
So, Giedrius, very quickly, are NATO members preparing for a new world order?
I think NATO members are preparing for a new world order, and basically United States is trying to consolidate all allies it can in order to contain Russia and China. Let's not forget that in the strategic concept, the alliance between Russia and China was titled as a possible threat for the future and the liberal world order.
All right, gentlemen, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk. And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Ayşe Süberkaş. If you've got any comments, follow us and tweet us at Straight Talk TRT. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.